alaikum and welcome to a new series of The Struggle Within on Ahlulbayt TV, where we are looking at the rational arguments for the existence of a creator, of a divine entity, and also looking at rational arguments for why Islam is the best path to follow and where we can also get knowledge from about this path. And my guest is Sayyid Hassan Sadr, who's going to take us through these stages. This is a series and is loaded up online, so if you miss any one of these programs, you can just go to YouTube and access it online as well. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So to continue the discussion, what are we going to talk about today?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. For those who followed us throughout the series, we started with the rational thinking, proving the existence of the Creator, his main attributes, all based on rational thinking, on logic, on reason, without even opening the holy book, the Quran, and to reassure people, whatever those conclusions were, using rational thinking, they actually match how the Quran describes the Creator, which is the beauty of Islam. That's, strength of the rational foundation. I think it's the time to start talking about the spiritual growth. Where do we take spiritual guidance from? Why is it important to look into spirituality and spiritual growth? We have hinted before about the aim of the creation, and maybe we can revisit that in terms of more elaboration, more examples, the ascent towards the Creator. Yeah. But I think it's very important for people right at the beginning to identify where do they take the guidance from.
Yeah, good question. This is obviously again a question that people have if they are embarking on the path. They may be looking online, reading many different books, speaking to different people, joining different groups. Another issue is, of course, that for those of us who are living outside countries where there are a lot of scholars, we have just a few scholars to rely on. And those scholars are often very overworked and they can't answer everyone's questions. So, yes, where do we go for guidance?
It's important to establish what kind of framework we want to follow. The Islamic framework from the school of Ahlulbayt is one that has logic, reason, rationality as the foundation, and then the rest of the development is through this spiritual growth. It's a unique model. It's, I have to say, very strong, because whatever the steps you're taking in the spiritual growth, you know that the foundation is based upon reason. And this is unique because other avenues for spiritual growth that, as you rightly said, they're available online, books, lectures, courses, not taken from the Islamic faith, not taken from Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, the family of the Prophet. They don't have the same strength in terms of foundation. And people may find similarities in the steps, the spiritual growth steps, especially within the Muslim faith. There are several schools of thought, several teachings, several methods, and people might find similarity. So you find, well, what's wrong then? I'm a follower of Ahlulbayt, but now I want to read up more about spiritual growth, and I will access material that's not based solely on Ahlulbayt and so from Ahlulbayt alayhi salam, because as you said, there is maybe some deficiency in resources in terms of scholarly resources, books, translated material, and so on. And my concern about this is the steps may look similar. The same Islamic terminology may be used to describe both, like tawakkul, entrusting Allah, relying on Allah, like istighfar, seeking forgiveness. And people might say, well, this is very basic, everyone knows about it. If you want to get into depth, the beauty of the school of Ahlulbayt is that there's so much into it. So the terminology may be similar, but if your foundation is not based upon logic and reason, any slight deviation from this strong foundation, the further you follow that particular path, the wider the gap between you and the target would be.
Yeah.
Which is why I say it is very important to clarify the approach, the framework quite earlier on, and to adhere to those scholars who have done work within this framework of the school of Ahlulbayt, which has a strong foundation.
Yeah.
And I have to share with all due respect that other approaches, other methodologies that are outside the Islamic faith, they, everyone has the right intention, inshallah,
Yeah.
but they will certainly miss the target because there will be ideas that come to people's mind about, oh, this makes sense, it might be right, let's do it. Let's use this for, controlling the soul. Let's try this approach, try this method. Maybe it's done, and I'm going to refer just to some parts of our planet, not to box anyone, but it's practiced in China, it's practiced in India. Again, not to generalize over anyone there, but these are places where such methodology has been developed over some time, but not based on the Islamic faith. If you want to read up about it, just to broaden your horizons, maybe, but to try and follow it, leaving the treasure of Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, I think you're probably making a big mistake.
Right. So, with regard to scholars, how do we access scholars or scholarly works?
Those who are familiar with history of the Islamic faith will know that there has been within the Muslim Ummah, within every school, including the school of Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, slightly two different preferences. There's a preference of spirituality, focus on the depth, on the true meanings, and maybe with that focus there has been some neglect over the rulings, over the jurisprudence, over what some people wrongly describe as the surface. This is the surface. Let's ignore the surface and focus on the core. Opposite to that, there's been a preference of scholars and people to know, this whole approach of the depth is very dangerous. You should just adhere to what the obvious meanings, the rulings, the focus on what's halal and haram, these hidden meanings, possible meanings, what others are considering as depth, deep meanings, they're not important. Allah has not made them obligatory for you to understand. It's clearly prescribed in Islam. If you do this, this is halal, this is haram, this is fi sabilillah, this is according to the will of Allah, and this is not. So let's focus on the jurisprudence, on the rulings. And unfortunately, at some points in history, there's been clash of people who have, mistrust, su'u dhann, between the two different preferences. Those people are, those who focus on the rulings think, those who claim depth are basically ignoring the most important aspects of the Sharia. And Sharia does not mean the rulings, just the whole, Islamic jurisprudence and doctrine. And those who are focusing on spirituality, they say you're completely missing the point. However, what is our obligation? Well, our obligation is to celebrate the uniqueness of the school of Ahlulbayt, that we do actually have people who've combined both preferences. And the only people who have managed to do that are jurists who have done research in-depth research into spiritual growth.
Yeah.
Most of the people who, I have to say, most people who've written about spirituality or spiritual growth are not jurists. They might be poets.
Yeah.
They may be poets. They may be students of knowledge. They may be clerics. Most of them are not really scholars. As the viewers know, within the school of Ahlulbayt, in terms of the Hawza, which has existed now for over 1,000 years, we have different levels. We have students of knowledge, we have the clerics, we have scholars who've specialized in a particular field of Islamic research, and then on top of them we have the jurists, the fuqaha,
Right.
those who have the ability to deduct the Islamic ruling. And amongst the most knowledgeable of the jurists are the maraja'. Not every jurist is a marja'.
Yeah.
The maraja', the reference scholars, those who we do taqleed to. And a point worth saying, since most of the viewers are probably living in the West, the most important bond that protected Muslim communities, the most important bond is the bond between any community and the jurists. So if anyone is out there is doubting the importance of the link between us as a Muslim community, as a Muslim ummah, and the center of knowledge in the Hawza, they should read history to find out that if you lose that link, then there is no guarantee that you will continue on the straight path. That's a point worth making. Amongst the jurists, and even amongst some of the maraja', who are the experts in Islamic rulings and have done research about spirituality, there are few, but they're out there. I think that's where we need to learn spiritual growth from someone who's expert in jurisprudence, but have also done research in theory and practice upon this hidden treasure of Islam, which is spiritual growth. And if you read the writings of someone who has such capability, then you are really comfortable and confident that no conclusion on spiritual growth would ever contradict the clear Islamic rulings, because the writer, the researcher, is a jurist himself, is a mujtahid, is a faqih. And that's where our community needs to focus. And if it means investing some resources into translating such unique work, then it's worth it.
I think this is this is such a big issue that we see other schools of thought putting billions of dollars into translations and propagation, and we still, I think, in the Shia community are behind on translating what is available. And most likely, what is available, without a doubt, is much richer and more in depth.
Indeed.
But
and it's a responsibility, I think, of the ummah, of us as a community. I mean, we have high expectations of our scholars because we've been blessed with the legacy of the Imams, alayhim salam, Ahlulbayt. So they are the standards, aren't they? So we compare our scholars to them because we're all their followers, and our scholars lead us on this path. And we've also been blessed with such unique examples in history. I mean, you can't examine history every 100 years without finding few examples of followers of Ahlulbayt, jurists who were such unique figures in terms of knowledge, practice, leadership qualities. So we have high expectations. But I think on this particular matter of translation, propagation of knowledge, it's the community. It's our responsibility. I mean, we could put some resources together and organize ourselves and go and access knowledge that's available from such highly qualified jurists and translate it and propagate it. And so it's not a one-way system. It's a two-way responsibility.
No, definitely. And of course, there are many people who are bilingual, trilingual, who do have the skills, but I feel it's not encouraged enough. More people who have 2 languages, 3 languages, there's not enough encouragement for those people to use those languages to translate the text.
Indeed. And sometimes you're absolutely right, the talent is there, but we as a community, we don't support that. You know, we are quick, and it's not a reason not to continue to do that, but we are quick to allocate resources to certain activities with pleasure, and sometimes in abundance, and we should not stop, we should continue, but we should identify the needs. If Islam is about jurisprudence and spirituality, then we should have books about jurisprudence and about spirituality. And if those books are written by jurists, then we're confident. And if you examine them, I mean, there are a few examples to mind. If you examine them, there are no contradictions. They're all kind of elaborating on the same point. But what's unique about them is you find them how they clarify some of the misconceptions that are probably widely spread from people who are not so qualified, who've written about spirituality. Which is why I find them very, very useful. Very useful.
So, and then other sources of guidance. What are the other sources of guidance we can look to?
So reading the work is one thing. And what I find more inspiring than reading is examining the examples, the living examples of those who've practiced such a balanced life. Indeed, within the community of followers of Ahlulbayt, there has been several examples, including in the 20th century, 21st century, those who have managed to combine spirituality with activism. Those who were close to them would tell you they never abandoned Salat al-Layl, the nightly prayers. Those who've practiced the highest level of akhlaq, of the best moral conducts, even with their enemies. Those who've done that, yet were the most active people in fighting injustices. There's unfortunately this tendency is if you're an active person, if you're working for the betterment of society, then your mind is occupied with fighting injustices, with real change. You don't tend to allocate much attention into spiritual growth and spirituality because you're doing something, in your opinion, in your assessment, far more important. And if you're on the other side, if you want to focus on spiritual growth, then being engaged in activism, in real change, may distract you from focusing on your personal growth. And to remind the viewers what the standards are, the standards is what the Imams have described, the companions of the awaited Imam, Al-Imam Mahdi Ajjalallahu Farajah. There's a description from the Imams about them. رُهْبَانٌ بِاللَّيْلِ لِيُوثٌ بِالنَّهَارِ. By night they are monks, and by day they are like lions. And scholars have written about this, jurists have written about this, that at night time, when there isn't much of activity out there, it's time for rest, then that's your time when you have that personal one-to-one connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and plenty of time to do it. The Quran says, إِنَّ لَكَ فِي النَّهَارِ لَسَبْحًا طَوِيلًا. Addressing the Prophet, during the daytime, you have enough space. Engage with people, be with people, plan with people. But at night, certainly the parts of the night where everyone is asleep, that's unique. You can dedicate that for Allah. You could be the monk by night, and during the day, you don't compromise anything. And it's important to study the examples of such people. And within our scholarly community, there's been quite a few examples. And you see the barakah, the blessings in their work. When they were fighting injustices, you find the blessings, the barakah of their work. And on a personal level, well, we're not there to judge, but it's obvious that the closest people to them were inspired. And that's a sign of sincerity. Unfortunately, we can fall into the trap of acting. I could pretend in an interview, in a lecture, in a camp, that I have the highest levels of moral conducts with the fellow brothers and sisters. But when I go home, when I go back home, my wife, my children, my parents, my siblings, these are the people who would see the true me when no one else is watching apart from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and them. So when you speak to the families of those followers of Ahlulbayt, those jurists, they will tell you about what kind of akhlaq they displayed inside the house, with their neighbors, with their close circle, and obviously like we know them in the public. And that's, I think, is a sign of sincerity, and that's what we should do. If you want spiritual growth, then it should reflect on a personal relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also it should reflect on the way one conduct himself or herself with the people that you have most friction with, people that you have the most contact with, your own family, and indeed everyone else, including the enemy. And so apart from reading books, look at the lives of those people, those great personalities who did not live at the times of the Imams. That's another point. They lived 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. They were here. And I'm sure we'll have more examples, but like with all those great examples, we only get to know them after their martyrdom, after their departure, after they move on to the real life.
I think also keeping company with people who, are wise or have good conduct is also very important, because there's so much that you can pick up just through observation and being in the right type of company, more than you can just, from a book.
Indeed.
And I think a lot of people that read on spirituality, but again, haven't had the opportunity sometimes to be in an environment that is where people are kind of well trained in ethical behavior. There's still that, difficult problem of the ego, of the general behavior. So they may have read deeply into something and be even very inspired by it, but still have kind of a lack of awareness on some basics of conduct.
Choosing the right company, it might sound a bit like, parent to child. You should choose the right company. But in reality, the narrations of Ahlulbayt have mentioned the right company so many times, not for kids, not for teenagers, but for us as adults as well. To choose the right company, to make sure that the person you're going out with, that you're mixing with, that forms your environment, is of the best caliber. There are narrations to the effect that a person have not had a greater blessing after becoming a Muslim than having a true brother, a believing brother. And there's a similar narration that not the second most greatest blessing is having a spouse, a believing spouse. So same meaning. A brother that you spend your company, or a sister that you spend your company on, a friend, or a spouse. The greatest blessing after becoming a Muslim is to have such a faithful person next to you, as a friend, as a spouse, and so on. The narrations that address that the believer is the mirror of his fellow believer. And in the professional world, we're encouraged to receive feedback If you go on those leadership development courses these days, one of the most important pillars of success is feedback.
Yeah.
Feedback as a company trying to sell a product, or feedback as a person within your own team. And in the world of political correctness, we're losing on this feedback because people don't want to, say the wrong thing. They don't want to lose you as a friend. They just want to be polite. They don't want to be misunderstood. So there's a tendency of holding back the feedback. In Islam, imagine what kind of feedback you would get from a faithful person who shares the same goals as you, is following the same framework of development as you, and you have, like you've stated, you have just, made a mistake. You've just conducted yourself in a way that's not in line with the divine guidance. Who would tell you? Who would remind you?
Yeah.
A faithful brother or a sister or a spouse would be the best person to tell you. Our scholars write about the enemies. The enemies would tell you.
Yeah.
Because the enemies would be there just waiting for you to trip. But do you really want to wait for an enemy to highlight your mistakes? What about here just having an open ear, an open mind and heart to the spouse, to your brother, to your parents, and hear from them that feedback? Oh, by the way, I don't think this is Islamic. I don't think this is right. You may need to revisit this.
Yeah.
You may need to, revise this. I think it's one of the greatest blessings and practical tips, just like we've discussed on feedback in itself. And such an environment, surrounded by people of faith, would fit in with someone who has such higher goals in life, someone who has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as his main aim. Like we've discussed, the whole aim of the religion is to worship Allah, and worshipping means that ascent towards the Creator.